Welcome everybody to our Thursday session, and it's nice to see everybody coming back. And so many, if you're new, welcome to you. If we don't have your email address and contact information, I'm going to ask you to put it up in the chat section so Julie can get it down and make sure you get future mailings and future articles sent to you. I'm Jonathan Lang. I'm an organizer with Metro IAF. I know most of you, but if I don't know you, that's who I am. And for the last 5 weeks or so, we've been doing a session on Thursdays for about an hour. Usually we do a reading, and we've read a bunch of really good stuff. And then one person or two people lead a discussion of that reading or a little reaction to that reading. Excuse me. That's not what we're going to do today. What we're going to do today instead is, there is no particular reading for today. Hello, Tanushree. There is no particular reading for today. Instead, we're going to have 5 people who've come to a number of these and have done the reading, react to the reading so far, specifically talking about how the reading and how the reflection might be affecting their thoughts about organizing, either as a leader or an organizer, when now during COVID, but also especially when COVID-19 subsides and we're allowed to move about more normally. So we're going to have 5 people do that. And then when done with that, other people can say what they'd like to say, and then we'll ask Lord Glassman to kind of react to the reactions. So doing this today are going to be at least Amy Vruno, Dean Deida, Reverend Edmonds, Sami Atris Tanushree who's an organizer with us in Montgomery County. So we'll start with Amy. Amy Vruno.
Hello, everybody. I'm Amy Vruno. I'm an organizer with Metro IAF. I'm currently in my bedroom in Washington, D.C., turn office. I've been thinking a lot about, off of the reading, how dominant the market thinking is. I feel like the Koch brothers and others have organized it so strongly and relentlessly that it's almost like an unthinking robotic mantra. We must seek efficiency. The invisible hand is real and at work. We need government to be so small we drown it in a bathtub. And it makes me think about how much work we have to do like this around reflecting and asserting a confident counter theology, narrative, music, arts to counter it. And I thought about 3 different examples. One is my mom and the ways that she went to music to reassert her own humanity. She was a secretary, a typist. She worked at West Publishing, and she, on her way to work every day, realized that she was being treated as a commodity. She knew it. You know, what did Polanyi call it? A satanic wheel. I mean, that wheel turned more strongly as the company was sold to a multinational, and it became all about the bottom line of the stock market. She knew it. And sometimes to keep herself sane in it, she would play 9 to 5 really loud, the song. I almost wanted to play it here. I didn't know how to. And she would yell, you know, working 9 to 5, they'll just use your mind and never give you credit. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it. Right? And that was her way through music of saying, I am a human being, and realizing that there were other people asserting that. I thought about it, secondly, as I think about the negotiations we had in Washington around the privatization of public transportation. And I'm looking, Reverend Edmonds was a part of that, Barbara Kraft, you know. We remember those negotiations where we were negotiating. So there was streetcar service and bus service was handed over to multinational corporations. And we had to negotiate with the government to take responsibility for treating the men and women who operate the buses, fix the buses, as human beings. And we were working with the union to do so. And we would sit across the table from the government official whose job it is to administer the government. And they would robotically say things like, it's more efficient in the market. Government's too big. It's like, you're the government, man. And you have bought into it. And it took organizing and being relentless and sitting across the table with the officials, with the men and women who say, I'm a human being. I operate your bus. I pay 80% of my health insurance out of pocket. And you're going to have to pay for my health insurance either way, via Medicaid, through a welfare check, or through my wages and benefits. And the amount of power we needed to take the needle off the record of that language of efficiency was tremendous. And it felt like an ideological battle. And I'm an IAF organizer. I like to think about pragmatism and not just ideology, but it was an ideological battle. And then the third thing I think about is we've been organizing, Jonathan, Ben, Reverend Edmonds, and others with transit workers to prepare for a Supreme Court case that changed the ways that dues could be collected by a union. And so we worked with about 4,000 people, members, to figure out how to talk with their coworkers about paying dues. And the market language was so strong that when we coach people, we'd say, okay, role play, tell me, how are you gonna go talk to your coworker about dues? And a lot of times people would say, well, it's a good value proposition, right? It's a good investment. You want to pay dues so that someone's there to serve you if you get in trouble, right? So it became about not this holy thing that's about birthright, like Wolin talked about. This is how we organize together with one another to act on our birthright to make the world better. Instead, we had adopted the language of the market in our own institutions. And so we had to stop and challenge people to reflect and say things like, you don't really believe that. That's not why you're a part of the union, right? That's not why this is important to you. And when people would stop and reflect, they would tell stories about people. They talk about their love for the passengers and the how good it feels to be part of an organization that moves the city, gets people where they need to go. They would talk about the guys who taught them how to drive a bus. You know, I heard stories about people who are part of the 3 Million Mile Club, which means that they drove on city streets for 3 million miles without an accident. Right. How many times around the circumference of the earth is that? And what it meant to be a person who provides high quality work and contributes. So I think we need to do more of this kind of reflection, because we have, in many cases, and even some of our congregations have adopted the language of the market. And we need to do more through music, through theology, and this kind of reflection to reassert our own humanity with one another.
Thanks, Amy. Dean? You're muted, Dean. There you go.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Dean Deida, and a bit about myself, I guess I'll say. I'm the son of Puerto Rican and Cuban immigrants. My last name is Portuguese, a remnant of the Portuguese slave trade. My parents moved to America to escape economic destabilization of their countries. They would not have moved here if they had another choice for survival. I was born into poverty in American slums in the South Bronx. Here, I struggled as a youth between the urge to honor my parents' dedication and lawful obedience in a society that ruthlessly exploited them, and my own rejection of helplessness. Something in my DNA provoked me to seek out power. I filled my parental void with the examples of gangsters on the street corners. I cannot say that my schools, hospitals, and social services failed me. Poverty pimps and Medicaid mills functioned to thrive off misery. When I was 15, my father was already dead from cancer, but I was walking the streets holding a Tech 9 for my mentor, One Leg John, a 55-year-old Puerto Rican gangster. He needed a scapegoat, and I needed a father. In that way, we found safety in each other. Luckily, I found myself a new mentor, a man named Paul Auerbach. He was the Department of Education librarian. I was the head of the largest Latino gang at the time. We met inside the most violent place in America, the Adolescent Building in Rikers Island. I was stuck in the system, feeding into the expectations of the prison industrial complex, a fact my friend Paul was eager for me to question. Fresh perceptions urged me to use my status at Rikers in different ways. My sworn enemy, Mike, the head of the largest African-American gang, agreed to help me keep the peace. And for the first time in my life, I used power to defy the system rather than to feed it. Once free from prison, Paul encouraged me to enroll at Bronx Community College. There, my curiosity caused me to become elected vice president of student government. I began associating with electoral politicians. Eventually, this led me to become the chief of staff of the Bronx Democratic County machine. And for over a decade, I was in charge of exploiting the naive and ambitious to turn out the vote. The others, party cronies, understood that their jobs depended on the machine. Occasionally, it was my job to remind them. The culture of electoral gangsters left me burned out. A friend I met and stayed connected to from my days with the machine encouraged me to apply for a position as organizer at the IAF. He thought of me when he saw the criteria was anger. My childhood, along with party politics, had left me with plenty of anger to go around. Today, I digest theories of commodification and debate with organizers from different backgrounds. This seems to me to be affording me a new scaffolding with which to examine the trajectory of my life. Democracy is a fragile thing that requires constant attention like a child, attention that I couldn't freely get born into poverty in America. Attention is recognition, and recognition requires power. When a child is born a commodity, power without struggle is not their inheritance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Reverend Edmonds, you want to respond to the last 5 weeks? You're muted, Pastor.
I was saying I've been asleep for the last 5 weeks. I want to respond to Maurice's article. The coronavirus crisis has sounded the death knell for liberal globalization. And excuse me 1 second. I want my wife to start my 5 minutes now. Hold on 1 second. She's going to put the timer up there. Okay, you got it, honey? Go. Now, Maurice says in this article, the virus will shape a new era, not by transforming things utterly, as some commentators have said, but by accelerating and consolidating trends that have played out over the last 12 years. So I want to respond, not really critique, Maurice, because he's a Lord. He's not the Lord, he's a Lord. So who am I to critique a Lord? But I'll try. The virus will shape a new era. The virus as a shaper. And I think in organizing, I think the virus is acting like an organizer in producing or accelerating a crack or a trend in a entity or political institution. And in this instance, the crack that was already there, the trend that was already there, was the nation state. The nation state has reemerged. It was already there, and the virus has deepened the crack, or the power of the nation state. So what lessons can we learn from the virus as an organizer? What lesson can we learn in producing cracks, being crack agents? Crack in a good sense, not bad. When I was trying to go to school, I had a racist supervisor who did not want me to go to college or undergrad. And he would give me work assignments that would conflict with my work schedule. One day, he asked me to clean out the freezer at a grocery store. Inside the freezer at the grocery store was a 10-foot by 10-foot block of ice that could have sank the Titanic. And he told me to clean it out before I left. And he gave me an ice pick. He said, use this, don't leave before you clean it out or you're fired. And so, you know, I mumbled some Old Testament words to myself, and I took the pick, and the Spirit said, hit it at the base of the block of ice. I hit it at the base of the block of the ice, and a crack formed. I hit it again, and a larger crack formed. Hit it the third time, and the block of ice crumbled to the ground. And that taught me about some things about the power of focused organizing. And I think one of the things that the virus does is to show us how to be focused. We're not focused. We lack focus, I think, in organizing. And we lack going after the big hit. We don't connect neighborhood actions with structural actions. And because of that disconnect, sometimes you get burnt out because you get tired of doing neighborhood actions, because we got into this thing to change the world. I just didn't get into it to change my neighborhood. I came into it to change the world. So I got to see the connection between changing my neighborhood and changing the world. And I think a lot of organizers lack world vision. They're too focused on neighborhood action. My wife just raised the red thing. I'll have to finish there. I'm finished.
Thanks, Reverend Edmonds.
Thanks.
Sami Atris.
Thank you very much. I prepared a presentation because it's not my mother tongue, but unfortunately I can't share my screen. So Julie is helping me with this. Yeah, thank you very much. Before I tell you how I benefit from the Metro IAF readings, let me quickly introduce myself as soon as the presentation is ready. My name is Sami Atris, and you can go to the next slide, please. And my father is Lebanese. Oh no, you have to, after every sentence, you have to click on the slide. My father is Lebanese and my mother is from Germany. So I can proudly say in the tradition of Kennedy, ich bin ein Berliner. I was born and raised in Berlin. Next slide, please. And I grew up there in a non-religious family with a very diverse background. Next slide. Click again, please. Although I was raised not religious, I converted in 2010 to Islam. Click it. And oh, that's going to be problematic. I just try to click after every sentence. So I saw when I started converting to Islam, I noticed many of my friends turned their back on me because back then it was very problematic to identify yourself with being German and being Muslim at the same time. So yeah, you can stop right there. So I tried to build up 2 organizations that would cope with this issue, help people to identify with whatever they like. One of them is the IGS, the Shia Muslim organization. It's an umbrella organization within Germany. And the other one is a local mosque called Al Hassanain. And I was especially concerned with the teenagers in this mosque because they often victimize themselves for not feeling appreciated by the government, by not being German. And I tried to help them become an active part of society. So in 2015, when the refugees came from Syria and Iraq, they turned those gyms into emergency shelters. And we would go every day to those shelters and help the refugees to cope with how to manage life in Germany. So in this work, I got introduced to community organizing and the platform called Wir sind da, which is a local affiliate comparable to the EBC in Brooklyn, for example. Next slide, please. So I became a leader for my local mosque within this affiliate. And I've been this leader for 4 years. And within this 4 years, click please, I finished my degree as an aeronautical engineer. And shortly before I finished my degree, these 2 guys popped up and they offered me a job as an organizer. And until today, I don't know why they would hire an aeronautical engineer, unless they maybe want to organize space. But I'm very happy they did. And today I'm an organizer for the DICO, which is the German Institute for Community Organization. Next slide. So for 1 year, I've been organizing within these 3 areas of Berlin. And I started, those 3 areas hold around about 850,000 citizens. And I started my work in the red area where very high privileged people live. They have high education. And I met those 2 ladies there. I had no relationships in this area before. And one day I was in a meeting with those 2 ladies. One of them, click, was Andrea, a lady who has 30 years experience in community organizing, and Amai, who had decades of experience in governmental work. So both of them discussed political thoughts and issues, how to find solutions. And I found myself in this discussion being this guy on the next slide, who has no clue about all those political issues and questions and thoughts, because I have a background as an engineer and not as a political scientist. So I quickly noticed that if I want to go face to face with experienced leaders like those and highly educated ones, I need to learn this craft, and I need to learn, get to know all the political thoughts. Stop, please. In order to go face to face with them. So this is the first example how the readings benefit me. The second story is just a few days old, and it's about this guy you can see here. His name is Michael Müller, and he's the mayor of Berlin. And we have a good relationship with him. In fact, for many years, we have a deal with him that we will meet twice a year with him. One of these meetings is going to be a big meeting with hundreds of people gathering. And the second meeting is a small work meeting. And all of you know, in the time of Corona, there are going to be big decisions made. And we thought, because of our good relationship with him, on the next slide, we should write him a message, an email, and tell him we want to be involved in this process of making decisions. And unfortunately, his office answered us 3 months after we wrote them the mail. And they said, okay, you can meet the mayor, but it will be a meeting which is informally, and it will take place in August, which is unfortunate, because in August, all of the important, or most of the important decisions are going to be made already. So when I read this mail, this guy popped up in my head, and he was staring into my soul, telling me the following thing: they don't recognize you. So this is one thing, or the second thing, that I benefit from these readings. We have certain patterns within our work that will repeat themselves every time. And we have this text of John L. Lewis, which was about recognition, which is a pattern that is going to occur many times within our work. And because of those readings, I'm able to wake up at night, read an email like this of the office, and instantly understand the problem that I'm facing. So that's it, and I'm very happy to get to know all of you.
Tanushree, you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Tanushree Isaacman. I organize in Maryland with the IAF. And this past few weeks, these readings have provoked a lot of thought and stirred some emotion as well. And I wanted to share a couple of thoughts. The first one is Lord Glassman's piece, and this idea that one of the consequences of this COVID crisis is the visibility and the necessity of the working class. And, I grew up working class. My mother worked for 15 years as a cashier at Walmart. And at that time, we were living in a liberal haven in central New Jersey, where everyone around me hated Walmart, and so you didn't tell folks that your mama worked at Walmart. And when your teachers would say, I tried to call your mom, but it went to Walmart, what's going on? You never spoke up and said, well, that's where she works. That was a secret that was kept in our house. And so during this crisis, the visibility and the necessity of the working class is visibility and necessity of the work that my mom did. And so, kind of tying that to my organizing right now, I did something kind of unusual. I joined one of these, Montgomery County is one of these liberal havens as well. They talk the good talk. And so they did this a few months ago. They passed this equity legislation. And so they have these committees set up. They did a committee on jobs and work. So I did something very un-IAF-like, where I joined one of these calls on jobs and work. And then I did something very IAF-like, which is where I set up some meetings with two people who interested me in those calls, and just did some relational meetings with them over Zoom. And they were both, you know, one worked for 1199 SEIU, and the other one was the political director of the laborers. And we just, you know, we've been talking, we've been building relationship. We're trying to figure out, you know, what is their take on politics now? What is their vision for the community? What are ways that we can work together? And some other folks on this call from Montgomery County, Steve Yank, others, you know, this forum has given us a common intellectual and political base to have some of this work that we're launching in Montgomery County around work, around project labor agreements, doing research into what Milwaukee did in 1984 to organize the unemployed. You know, we're digging in deeper, and we're challenging each other to reach out both within our network and outside of our network to understand better, you know, who are the unemployed, and how do we have a common imagination, collective imagination around community standards for work. Secondly, I've been thinking Polanyi's piece, I haven't read Polanyi since graduate school, so it was really nice to revisit him in this stage in life. And there's one piece where we didn't really touch on, he has this reference to symmetry and centricity. And he's talking about these concepts in the context of a pre-capitalist community. These are principles that guide them and how they govern themselves. And I've also been thinking about Lord Glassman's comments about how do you hold on to these conservative values while being more radical. And conservative values I understand to mean connection to place, to family, to home. And I think, to me, those things are connected. You know, to be connected to place and family and home is about being whole. It's about symmetry. It's about centricity. And I think about how we, in our organizing, as an organization, how can we bring more symmetry and centricity to our work? Last week, you know, for the past 2 years, I've been working on this campaign to build a new school building for Southlake Elementary School, which is a Title I elementary school, 900 Black and brown children. And, you know, we got it through the superintendent, we got it through the Board of Education, we got it through the county executive. This last step, this vote by the council members, was supposed to be the last step and the easiest step. That's what it was supposed to be. And during this time of COVID, they changed the rules. They did some horse trading in the background, and they decided to delay Southlake another year. And so we needed to figure out kind of how do we react in this moment. You know, this is not just about neighborhood organizing. This is bigger than neighborhood organizing. And one of the things that we decided in that moment, you know, this council member, Sidney Katz, he is probably the most conservative council member right now. But he's also, you know, he was the unofficial mayor of Gaithersburg and still is, even though he's in the county council. And he holds a huge amount of sway. He's the kind of politician who brings people together and can have a conversation. And so we acted on Sidney Katz. You know, we met with all the council members who was willing to meet with us. But with Sidney Katz, we put some special attention on him. And at the end, you know, he used to be a small business owner, and he has strong faith and business ties in the community and across the county. And he understands South Lake. He understands the history of South Lake. He's been to South Lake lots of times. He understands the principals and the teachers there. Ultimately, at the last hearing where every council member decided that they were going to delay the building of this school building, Katz was the one who spoke up and said, we're going to have a special hearing in August on South Lake. And I'm going to he directed the head of the education committee. He told him that he was personally going to be there. And so I think we need to think more about our conservative values at this time. And then lastly, Reverend Edmonds, what you talk about, how do we tie this to the bigger global implications of our local organizing? That's something that's been very important to me. And Lord Glassman, you share this in a small story where you were giving a talk to the Pope, and you said you quoted, I think it was the Pope who said that you starve the parents and you give pencils to their children. And this is not good enough. It's not good enough. And so that's, it's something that I'm continuing to struggle with in organizing. How do we make this bigger? How do we have more of an imagination? How do we build enough power to get at realizing a bigger imagination? Thanks.
On to the readings or to what's been said today. Let's do that. Morris, do you want to start, or do you want to?
Sure. So I'm going to try and be brief, but just to say, I've got a very unusual organizing emotion, which is gratitude. I really appreciated what was just said. I just want to pick up on a few things, and before I do, to say that there needs to be, I think, a refocus, Reverend Edmonds, on what organising is. I completely agree with that. And it's great that Arnie Graf is on the call. Just to tell a bit of my story, is that I was really involved in local organising and went national. Tanushree, Reverend Edmonds, I went into Parliament, I engaged with that. And Arnie Graf came over to the Labour Party to renew it. And the curious part of that story is that 8 years after he was there, people are still coming up to me and saying, can you get a hold of, there's a recognition that needs to happen. But the reason I'm back with you is, and Reverend Edmonds, this is the vital, is that there is without an organized body, the mind just goes to where globalization is. It goes to the state, it goes to the market, you privatize, Amy, or you nationalize, and there's no participation of people in that. There's no agency of people in that. I don't know what it's like in America, but here we have this thing called a consultation exercise. And essentially you go to local people, you have a meeting, and then you do exactly what you were going to do before you had the meeting. So Tanushree and Reverend Edmonds, how we conceptualize the relationship between the local organizing and the national politics is a central matter. But what I will say to you as witness is that without local organizing, it will always fail. The change will always fail because there'd be nothing there. This is what's happened. It's been hollowed out and emptied out. There are the local institutions, and the market, or capital to be more specific, and the state are dehumanizing forces that commodify and administer. And that was the logic of the Polanyi piece, is that the process of commodification is intense. And essentially, we all find ourselves caught between essentially conservative bigots and progressive snobs. That's the dialectic that's going on all the time. And we've got to create that space. And the more conservative you are, Tanushree, I've found, the more radical you become, because that's the thing with the Wolin piece that Amy referred to very well. The more you grasp the scale of the humiliation of people as people, you know, what they've lost any sense of honor, any sense of status. That's where the politics begins, in a way. So that's why I began. So if we can't conceptualize our work straight, that's terrible. So this is what this is about. You know, we're resisting very inhumane and very powerful systems, ideological systems, thought systems, but above all, enforcement systems that disintegrate any sense of community between people, you know, that push you constantly to careers. And then this is directly sort of in response to Rev Edmonds. There's a space now that we can speak. You know, before you couldn't, you know, what Amy said, if it's not efficient, then it's not, you know, everything was contractual. But we've got a covenantal moment to move into where there is a recognition of workers. You know, this is where we are now. That there is a recognition that all those invisible, fungible, replaceable, useless people are in fact vital people. So Tanushree, now your mum is recognized as a human being for a moment, even in your progressive haven, and the places that they live matter, and that relates to food, and all of these places were previously abandoned. So there is a very promising moment to move into. So just then to respond to the specific things that were being said, I mean, Amy, if you think about care homes, right? If you think about the contractual nature of care homes, so we basically underpay people, don't train people, and then hand over our parents to them. This is now visible as a thing. So that's where we've got to be very wise in conceptualizing and working. That's no way. This is, so progressives, they don't really like family, right? So we could talk here from the conservative side, Tanushree, and say, that's no way to treat my mum, right? That's just no way to treat my mum. But that leads you directly to defy the system that actually isolates these people and treats them purely as commodities. That's so it's our imaginations that have got to be a lot. In everywhere that you are, these two universal forces are in alliance. And Amy, the New Deal, people go on about the New Deal, that was one moment in American history, but for the vast majority of American history, the state and the market have been in complete alliance, and they are identical in their processes. So our politics is a politics that has to renew relationships between people where they are. So this is the precious sort of inheritance that, and so when we looked at Polanyi, when we looked at Catholic social thought, when we looked at Wolin, it was just ways that could relate to your experiences. And in the end, I think, Amy, saying that human beings are not commodities is not the most countercultural act in the universe, that we're social beings, that we naturally relate to each other and we're mutually dependent. I think we can get away with this ideologically.
I think
and
so.
I think
it takes a fight, though.
Yeah, it's a fight, but it's a fight that I've found if you pitch it on that ground, that you win. If you pitch it on that ground is when it's when it drifts. And I think the cat story that Tanushree was saying would back that up. And then obviously, you know, Dean, I get it completely. I'm still absorbing what you were saying, but you've been commodified and administered within a violent system, a system where violence was the predominant. And obviously our thing is, politics is a way of avoiding that violence, but it doesn't avoid the conflict. It doesn't avoid the tension. That's what that's about. So and you know, you say democracy is a child, but it's also the inheritance. What inheritance do we pass on? This is what I think is at stake in our work, because it can go. Think about this for a moment. You are the custodians of that politics in America. You know, this is where it is. You've got the globalizing Democrats, you've got the capitalist and merciless. That whole thing is is busted, and out of this will emerge something better if we hold our nerve. And really, what I wanted to say to Reverend Edmonds is, you know, is that the body, you know, the body has been emaciated and broken. So there is no national change unless there's some health in the body. You know, the mind's not gonna, so our work, I just wanna restate that every act that you do locally to preserve human relationships is a blessing. And that's what, in this space, there's going to have to be very big changes going on politically, but it will only be on the basis of this. And Sami, I really appreciate
I would
yeah, sorry.
say, Maurice, thank you for that. I would also, a couple things. I fully agree about local institutions are very important to the overall universal fight. I kind of sense that those within the local institutions can't see that what they're fighting has universal impact. That's one thing. Second thing is, does our definition of worker work anymore?
Well, we've got a new one, you know, something you can't do from home, right? So it involves going out.
Is we talk about the dignity of work.
Yeah.
I think there was a time when the worker had a degree of dignity inherent, innate in them. But now it's changed. And the worker, I don't care what work they're doing, they have to find dignity or rediscover a dignity outside of their work. And, you know, I just think that the workplace and the work, at one time, my father was a unionist. I came up in a union family. He was proud about his work and all that stuff like that. But I think, you know, unions have changed, things like this. So can work produce dignity?
Well, I mean, I think the presentation that Kathleen made, the Catholic social thought one from the encyclicals, you know, it's all there. Look, I don't want to hog, but Reverend Edmonds, I'd love to engage with this.
Yeah,
I really would. I just want to say to Sami that the Shia thing is very important, and we do a lot of work here in London around Imam Hussein, around the Arba'in, around the pilgrimage, around mutuality, and particularly sharing the water. So I really appreciated what you said, and just to say that that's an extremely important resource now, because it's very, very compatible with what we're doing, and the importance, obviously, of the chapter we read in Alinsky about recognition and the power analysis, and then final, just Tanushree, that was really great and very interesting. But reciprocity, you know, there's contract and then there's redistribution. That's market power and state power. What we're about is a mutual space, the creating of a mutual space where people actively participate as equals in constructing that. And that's the way that I've been working with it. There's loads more, sorry to go on, but I just want to express my gratitude that you've given me a strong steer that we could go deeper into this. And it would be great if all of you were part of that work. Thank you.
I want to thank the 5 people who responded. I really enjoyed listening to your reactions. Ben, did you want to say something, or just had your thumbs up? Oh, I'm learning this stuff. I appreciate your reactions. I also think it's when I listen to your reactions and do the reading myself, it makes me wonder whether, you know, as Lewis said during the strike that he held with Alinsky in the back of the yards in 1939, he said there needed to be an instrumentality for working people. And I guess what it makes me think is whether the current unions can be reformed in any way to be that instrumentality that puts humanity back into work. And I have my doubts. It's very painful for me to say that as a lifelong trade unionist, but I have my doubts whether they can.
You know, maybe I could add a word.
Sure,
Say
Bob.
something. You know, I work in a context where almost none of this is relevant in a way, but I'm thinking, I hear the complete invisibility of people like farmers, like rural workers, people who produce individually and in groups in the rural areas. Almost nothing you guys have been talking about has any relationship to reaching out to them.
It's interesting you say that, Bob. We have our first meetings this week with farmers. And I'm pessimistic in a funny sort of way about it. I'm excited about it, but I'm pessimistic about it because of the lack of organizations to relate to in the rural areas in America, and the tremendous kind of labor-intensive nature of organizing farmers that would be necessary, the kind of money you would have to raise to hire enough organizers, the kind of traveling people would have to do to actually meet with people face to face. So I'm both excited about the meetings we're doing and also kind of in my soul kind of pessimistic about it.
You know, I work with the extreme farmers, so to speak. I work with pastoralists, and there are no organizations at all.
No.
And there's no connection between helping them organize and them having any kind of confrontation with government. There's no connection at all.
Yeah.
And it would be totally fatal to try to have any kind of international or even national part of the work. It's all got to be about creating local organizations.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that the COVID thing does, because we're witnessing on television people spilling milk onto the ground, people burying crops underneath, is I think the first effort has to be to develop direct relationships through our churches and through our institutions to consumers for these farmers, to see if we can figure out how they can set up informal markets and get their product directly to consumers this summer, and see where that leads. I don't know where that leads, but see where that leads. I think that's where we're going to start, because there aren't institutions. The old Grange and other sorts of things you read about in the populist era, they don't really exist anymore. They're not there. Maybe there's farmer unions still in the UK, Morris. I don't know, but we're not finding organization here, that cooperatives or Grange or other sorts of institutions that we could relate to. So I think it is missing, and it's missing. You know, it's a huge miss, and we're hearing stories already about people, dairy farmers, who are selling their cattle to huge corporate farmers in Wisconsin. You know, we know some farmers there, so it's very scary what's going on. I think the market is going to try to reach deep into the farmlands and organize right now. Other responses? Leo, you want to talk about next week? The reading?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you to all who told their stories and comments today, because I think it really helped to tie what we've done in a somewhat more common or somewhat more universal fashion into the reality of everyday life, everyday organizing, everyday work that folks are involved in. And next week, we want to take this one step further by reading Hannah Arendt, or Hannah Arendt, as we say in German. In any case, she is probably the thinker when it comes to the idea of action and distinguishing collective political action, if you will, real politics as, or the political, as Wolin would call it, and not just politics, from other human activities, which are part of the human condition. And I've picked out a few chapters which try to touch on some of the things that we've already talked about, but then focus particularly on the notion of action and what differentiates action from other forms of human activity, such as laboring, such as, if you will, engineering and technology, basically, and the most human of activities acting together. And if you want some background on the life of Hannah Arendt, a great place to do that is, if you have an hour to invest, watch the YouTube video that is also has come to you in the readings for next week. It was one of the few interviews that Hannah Arendt gave in her life. It was done on German TV in the 60s. The interviewer, Günter Gauss, was one of the pioneers of German television interviewing shows, if you will. And he called the interview with Hannah Arendt one of the best interviews, or the best interview he had ever done. And she was also the first woman that he ever interviewed. He interviewed all sorts of political and economic bigwigs, and Arendt was the first woman that he interviewed, and his comment later what it was that was the best interview that he ever did. And it really gets into, it's really a kind of an extended individual meeting with her. So that's to be recommended. But please read at least the chapters that I've suggested, and any additional chapters, of course, that you'd like to. And looking forward to next week again with all of you. Thank you.
Our hour's up. Like everything else in the IAF, a few of us, especially those who spoke today, please stick around for an evaluation that we do after each one of these. Anybody else is welcome to stay as well. But look forward to seeing everybody next week. Same time, same station. And thank you for coming. And thank you especially to the 5 people who added Dean, Ed, Sami, and Tanushree. Thank you for what you gave us today. We really appreciate it.